Welcome to another globe-trotting, rebellion-inspiring edition of Defending the Despised, the ongoing series where I take my laser screwdriver and examine some of the most disliked or shunned things from the world of Doctor Who. This time I'll be turning my sights onto the most hated finale of the Russell T Davies era of the show, The Last of the Time Lords. Even though Series 3 had a 3-part finale, each episode is quite standalone, meaning Utopia earned huge acclaim, whilst The Last of the Time Lords became an infamous episode amongst fans, since it turned the Doctor into a goblin and a flying space Jesus, all in the same episode. Last of the Time Lords takes place a year after The Sound of Drums, showing Martha's mission to bring down the Master and release the people of Earth from his tyrannical reign. However, as I mentioned, this episode has become very much disliked across the board, but this is mainly due to the ending. Is the rest of the episode good enough to make this reputation unfair? And is the ending better than people give it credit for? Well, grab your shriveled human head in a sphere and let's see if we can defend The Last of the Time Lords. This video is going to be a long one, so I'll start at the beginning of the episode and work my way up, so you can understand why I don't think the ending is bad enough to warrant the episode's bad reputation. I think the opening of the episode brilliantly sets up the cynical and pessimistic atmosphere of the episode. The very first shot is of intergalactic traffic news warning spacefarers to avoid the dying planet. I think it's a nice outside perspective of an invasion, using that universal world building Russell T Davies always worked hard to create during his time as showrunner. This tone is further cemented with the sorrowful and pessimistic variation of the track Martha's Quest, which had previously appeared when she left the Valiant at the end of Sound of Drums and during the early stages of Utopia. I think it does a great job of showing the hopelessness of the situation for the population, ruled by this iron fist with no real hope of survival. It sets the bleak scene so incredibly well and shows us that this is a world without the Doctor there to save it. The Master has won. We then see the Master for the first time in this episode as he dances around the room to the song I Can't Decide by Scissor Sisters. It's so delightfully cheesy and campy, creating a surreal atmosphere for the scene. It shows that he's so comfortable in control of the planet without a care in the world, and almost treating it all like a game. It also shows that sociopathic side to him, because he's just dancing around and tormenting the Doctor, whilst the planet below dies more every passing day. Despite it being wacky on the surface, I think it's a good thing for the Master's characterization, really showing that maniacally evil nature of the character. Even though the soundtrack is cheesy, so much of the scene is brilliant, setting a lot of story beats up and characterizing him really well. There's a short moment between the two old enemies as the Master gloats about the dying planet and the mysterious reality of the Toclophane, as the Doctor stares into space absolutely dead inside, devoid of all hope. He's so vulnerable, which is furthered later on, albeit much more literally by turning him into a little goblin. It continues that trend started at the end of Utopia, stripping away the power of the Doctor in order to empower the Master further and further. It makes it even more intriguing then that the Doctor is still able to strike fear into the Master's hearts, despite this significant power imbalance. The Doctor says he has only one thing to say to his old frenemy, which immediately hits the Master and makes him vulnerable for just a second, forcing him to run from the Doctor, hiding from his unknown message. It ever so slightly upsets that power balance and shows that the Master isn't invincible and has these kinds of slight weaknesses, with this scene setting up the climax quite well. Despite a year of torture and humiliation, the Doctor, Jack and Martha's family all signal to each other in a slick scene reminiscent of heist movies, with everyone working their own roles and giving subtle signals to each other to prepare. It's quite well shot and serves as a way to establish where Jack and Martha's family fit into this story, as they're all being used by the Master in humiliating ways, like Francine having to make him breakfast in the morning. I love the big dramatic action set piece of the jailbreak, all of the supporting characters breaking free and enacting their plan. It gives a real punch and sense of hope for our characters, just to tear it away when the Doctor tries to use the laser screwdriver against the Master, only to find out it's locked to the Master's genetics. All throughout The Sound of Drums, the Doctor tried to to enact these plans just to find out the Master was one step ahead all along. This theme continues here, showing that even though the Doctor is trying to break free and solve things himself, he's powerless because the Master is still in complete control of everything, retaining that power over his enemy. He gloats about his control, describing the Doctor's fall from grace at his hands, describing how this hero has gone from saving planets and fighting the Time War to being this frail old shadow of his former self. The Master has always been beaten by the Doctor, so this is finally his chance to win, and he wants to make sure he beats all hope out of our hero in the process. It's about revenge for him, so it explains why he's tormenting him this way. I also like that this episode establishes that his ambitions don't stop with Earth. He rules with this severe iron fist, statues around the world showing his ego, but he has also turned the planet into a giant shipyard to wage war with the rest of the universe. He wants entire annihilation, not just the destruction of Earth, so I like that we're shown this further ambition, rather than him just stopping at this one planet. It's also nice that Russell T Davies finds a way to continue his television framing device here, despite television not existing anymore. The Master uses it to broadcast his supremacy to the people of Earth, keeping them pacified and scared by reminding them of who rules the planet. I like that he uses it to taunt Martha and try to downplay her importance, so that the population stops believing in her. However, this also shows a slipping of control. Martha remains a rogue element, the only thing on Earth he doesn't have control over, so he has to resort to this public display of torturing the Doctor to try and get to her and demoralize her. If anything, it actually empowers her by showing her mission is working. It's making the Master uncomfortable and putting him under threat, forcing him into this corner.
Received and understood, Miss Jones.
In order to demoralize Martha, the Master ages the Doctor up once again, this time suspending his regeneration capacity so that we can see what a 900-year-old Time Lord really looks like. There's a really dramatic, silent build up to the reveal, but then it pans down to show this thing. The Doctor becoming this little goblin is one of the many criticisms of this episode, and I definitely understand why. It just doesn't really look like it fits the tone of the scene or the episode. However, I've seen people criticise this narrative decision because it removes the presence of David Tennant, preventing him from being able to do his usual energetic, scenery-chewing performance. But I think that's kind of the point of the transformation. It removes the Doctor as we know him from the episode, visually communicating the character's helplessness, turning him into this little alien, tiny gremlin creature. You pity him because he becomes so small and weak. I think it's a good idea personally, it's just let down by the bad CGI of the creature. It serves as a way to really drive home the downfall of this charismatic character, reducing him to this ineffective creature locked inside of a humiliating birdcage. There's a good reason for this happening and it creates a great narrative effect. I think the bad visual effects of it make it a really easy punching bag for criticism because it just looks so bad, which is a huge shame because it's a fantastic way to eliminate the Doctor from the equation and push Martha into centre stage, making her the outright focus and hero of the episode. One of the smartest things this finale does is give a focus to each of our protagonists. There are 3 episodes and 3 protagonists, so I like that each one centres around a particular member of the cast. Utopia is all about Captain Jack and the fallout of parting of the ways. Sound of Drums is all about the Doctor and his relationship with the Master. So naturally, The Last of the Time Lords is all about Martha and showing how she's grown as a person throughout her travels, becoming a more commanding figure. She basically takes over the Doctor's role in this episode, becoming a mythical and hopeful figure inspiring hope in everyone she comes across during her quest. I think it's a nice way to complete her character development, making the companion a truly important part of the dynamic, all through her own choices and actions. It's not like Rose, who absorbed the time vortex and became a god. Martha does all of this by herself because of her own abilities. Even though the Doctor's perception filter TARDIS key allows her to travel unnoticed, it was obviously her idea to use it in this way, remembering how they used it in Sound of Drums, which shows her adaptability and smart thinking. I also like how Tom Milligan essentially becomes her companion for the episode, breaking down the Doctor and companion dynamic by putting the actual companion in a Doctor-like role. Martha is the one who has all of this knowledge about the universe and travelling through time, whilst Tom is the earthbound, everyday person who struggles to even entertain these kinds of concepts. Martha is in the driving seat and it really really shows, because she comes up with a way of finding out what the Toclophane are, executing her plan in a great sequence as they capture the sphere to examine, leading to a delightfully horrifying reveal. They open up the shell and inside is a shriveled up human head, which starts to talk to them and says the exact same phrase Kree said in Utopia, revealing that the Toclophane are actually all of the humans who fled during that episode. Utopia had been such an optimistic episode, showing humanity's survival and hope, but the loss of the Time Lords flips this entirely on its head, which I think is a great narrative idea. It shows that the Doctor, Martha and Jack were the ones who led the lambs to the slaughter, sending the humans out to be converted by the Master. It's a great way to show consequences, similar to how the Doctor deposing Harriet Jones allowed the Master to gain power in the first place. It successfully ties Utopia back into the rest of the finale more significantly than we were initially led to believe. I think this revelation creates a really nihilistic atmosphere, because the humans didn't end up escaping the end of everything after all, instead becoming monsters sent back along their own timeline to wipe themselves out.
Human race, greatest monsters of them all.
I love how the Doctor challenges the Master on this dramatic rewriting of history, with the Master's reply simply being,
I'm a Time Lord. I have that right.
It shows how the Master justifies his vicious actions, believing it's only natural and that he's owed this power based on his origins, along with suggesting that all the Time Lords are kind of evil too. I also think it's a good way to later show how far the Doctor has strayed from his strict moral compass in the waters of Mars. In that episode, he basically ends up doing the same thing as the Master, believing he has the right to change history because he's a Time Lord.
It's taken me all these years to realise the laws of time are mine, and they will obey me!
It strengthens those parallels between the Doctor and the Master, showing that both characters feel vindicated in their own usages of the power they have, even though they use this power for contrasting means. Even though it all turns out to be a ruse to trap the Master, the presence of a Time Lord killing gun is rooted within the reality of the show. Much like Martha says, organisations such as UNIT and Torchwood have been around long enough to have taken an interest in studying Time Lords, especially because UNIT straight up employed the Doctor and helped him in his many encounters with the Master. It also makes perfect sense for Torchwood to develop this kind of tech, since their whole motto was destroying aliens and appropriating alien tech, along with the organisation straight up being developed to kill the Doctor. As a viewer, it makes it easier to buy into Martha's quest and think it's real, so that her quest has a real superficial feeling of traditional stakes. I also think there's something quite meta about this trick. As the human race, we wouldn't openly believe in the true nature of her quest, so she has to lead the masses into believing there's an open, clear weakness of the Master, which we can all recognise, which is the power of gun. I do appreciate that Professor Doherty addresses the elephant in the room by saying Martha doesn't look like a killer. We know how much the Doctor disapproves of killing, so it's good to address it here, especially because it seems so out of character for a companion to strive to kill someone. It's also clever that Martha tries to avoid answering the question so often. I think it works well to play up the desperation of Martha's situation that this is her last resort. She has no other choice. Obviously the gun plan is a lie, but the episode does enough to make the audience believe it, which is important for the ending to work. Martha and Tom go to a halfway house where we see the true nature of her quest. I think it's a great scene because it shows how much of a mythical figure she has become. People holding her up to this pedestal and believing in her because of what she represents. She represents hope. Hope that they can free themselves of this vicious occupation. It's her once again assuming that role of the Doctor, becoming the symbol of hope and heroism. The interesting thing is though that this isn't even new. All throughout series 3, Martha has gone around inspiring hope in people, always convincing them to believe in the Doctor. It was an ongoing thread that shows it's her true nature to do stuff like this. It's not coming out of the blue, and she has always been this figurehead of hope. From Gridlock to 42, she has never stopped believing in the Doctor and inspiring hope in others on his behalf. I just think it's a shame that the story ends up devaluing this aspect of her character, returning to the Doctor being important, pushing her back down into a supporting role by making him the true figurehead of hope. Even so, I kind of like that she does this to herself, refusing to acknowledge her own heroics because she's just doing what's right. It's that whole idea of without witness and without reward that the Doctor Falls explored with the 12th Doctor. I also find it's interesting that Martha's own words about the Doctor being a hero apply to her as well.
He never stops. He never stays. He never asks to be thanked.
It represents how she's taken his role, become like him, and stepped up to the moment, using her experience to continue his legacy even though he's gone from this world and can't save people. Whilst Martha is in the house inspiring the people, the Master arrives on the street outside, demanding that Martha reveal herself or he kills more people. It's a way of catapulting us back into the reality of this world, reminding us of just how much power he holds. Martha goes out and faces him just like the Doctor would, refusing to let others die, continuing this role of her being the hero. It's such a great scene, directed incredibly with the dark lighting and barren street. It feels so post-apocalyptic. The Master destroys the bag containing the gun, eradicating his only weakness. However, in doing so, he exposes his actual weakness, which is his obsession with the Doctor. He's been so intent on goading and tormenting the Doctor this whole time that he doesn't kill Martha right then and there, deciding to take her up to the Valiant so he can do it in front of the Doctor. Throughout The Sound of Drums and The Last of the Time Lords, he is so obsessed with beating the Doctor that he hasn't figured out at every turn. But this obsession with goading him shows that he doesn't know when he himself is being played and beaten. It shows his downfall well because it uses that character strength against him. He didn't know when to just kill the Doctor, too focused on tormenting him and showing off. Regardless of the climax itself, I love the beginning of it. The Master brings Martha up to the Valiant, finally having that rogue element contained and preparing to launch his total annihilation of the universe. Everything accounted for and planned out. It mirrors the climax of The Sound of Drums, where he was in the same position, in control and milking every second of it. He even makes sure to take the vortex manipulator out of the equation this time, since Martha used it to escape in The Sound of Drums. It revisits that lingering sense of hopelessness as he gets ready to strike her down in front of her family and her friends. But then she laughs, immediately undermining him. You instantly feel that huge shift in momentum and power as the Master is finally caught off guard for once, Martha springing the trap on him and taking control. For the first time, he's the one underneath. He doesn't have all the answers and he has to wait for Martha to talk, rather than him being the one driving the conversation. It's such a subtle yet important shift in power, the first time since the end of Utopia that our protagonists actually have him cornered. I just think it's such a good way of turning the tables, with Martha just not taking the Master seriously, playing on his deep-set insecurities of wanting to be feared. But then we get to the climax, which is where all of the common criticisms come to fruition at once, despite the episode being pretty great up to this point. So now we've reached the point where all of the main criticisms come into play. The ending is the main sticking point, but I really don't think it's as bad as people love to claim. Sure, there are awful bits, but there are also good bits shining through, so let's walk through it in depth. I love the initial reveal of the gun plan being fake, a ruse to keep up an illusion of the typical concept of rebellion. Instead, Martha was telling stories about the Doctor that whole time, but then it all kind of falls apart a bit. It turns out that her real plan all along was to get them all to think the word Doctor all at once, to break the signal of the Master's Archangel network to defeat him. Now, your mileage on this may vary, because it requires a lot of suspension of disbelief. I don't mind it myself though, because the Doctor Who universe has always been adamant that humans have a low level of psychic ability, so I like that this is used and amplified to actually make it do something. Much like the Master's obsession with the Doctor, the Archangel network he used to gain control becomes the very thing that stops him. I think it's a good play by Martha, finding a hole in his seemingly flawless plans and bringing everything crashing down. I'm always a sucker for the poetic irony of a character's strengths being used as their downfall. The Doctor had managed to tune himself into the psychic wavelength so it restores him to his normal form, no longer being the little goblin boy. I think it's an inspiring scene that still gives me goosebumps because of the use of the track Martha's Quest, bringing back that optimism of humanity surviving and overcoming once again. People always like to call this scene a Deus Ex Machina, and it kind of is, but it's nowhere near as extreme as a lot of people say. The power of words and names was established all the way back in the Shakespeare Code, subtly setting up this solution right at the beginning of the series. It's no different to things like the heart of the TARDIS in The Parting of the Ways being set up in Boomtown. The solution was seeded earlier, so it doesn't come out of the blue as much as people say. However, I do think it was a stupid way to de-age the Doctor Doctor. A slight rewrite of his transformation could have done wonders to change people's opinions. Instead of the signal transforming him back to normal, they could have just not made the laser screwdriver isomorphic, and have Jack or Martha use it to restore the Doctor. Just a subtle change to the transformation. That's all it needed. You can keep the psychic ability destroying the network, but don't use it to de-age the Doctor. The magical transformation also leads to possibly the biggest criticism of the episode. After being restored to normality, the Doctor gets a force field and Jedi powers, essentially becoming Space Jesus. I think people are absolutely right to criticise this part of the episode, because it takes the mythology of the Doctor too far. I've always been a supporter of the idea of making the Doctor a very mythical and godlike figure to us mere mortals, since it roots itself in reality and shows how this kind of person would be seen by other species in the real universe. Since the show returned in 2005, this aspect of the character was always explored, increasing as the Davies era went on, with episodes like Love and Monsters and Army of Ghosts having characters that almost worship the Doctor and hold him up on this pedestal. I like that The Last of the Time Lords takes it a step further by being more literal, but it goes a bit too far and too literal with it. Giving him the powers and having him float across the room like he's on wires in a musical is a bit ridiculous and makes it hard to suspend your disbelief. I still think it's a great moment, but it's the reason the magical transformation becomes a problem. The Doctor has been called a god in the first 3 series already, so it doesn't need to be taken this far for the audience to understand the symbolism. Again, if there had been a slight rewrite removing the transformation and the flying, everyone would probably be much more lenient with the episode, since this aspect is hands down the most prominent sticking point. So it makes me sad to know it could have been so easily written out, because the rest of the episode as a whole is really good, and the concepts it was going for are good, it just realises them in the wrong way. Besides the Space Jesus stuff, the other big criticism of the episode is that the resolution comes with a reversal of time, neatly putting everything back exactly how it used to be, like a big red reset button. It's definitely a cheap resolution to the story, but I don't think there was anything else Russell T Davies could do. The finales to Series 1 and 2 were on a big scale, with Series 2 trying to up the ante from the parting of the ways, so naturally Series 3 also needed to up the ante and scale of its predecessor. The Series 3 finale had to be on a huge scale to feel important like the previous 2, rather than feeling like a downgrade. The problem stems from the modern day Earth setting. Big scale invasions and occupations like this had previously been done, but with different settings. Take the Dalek invasion of Earth for example, that was set in the far future, so you could just leave it as it is, without needing to mop up this burned apocalyptic world. However, the Davies era always sought to have a level of relatability for the audience, which is why it was always grounded in present day Earth. It works great for that relatability and world building, but it also creates a fragile continuity you can't disrupt too heavily. You can't just leave the world in this state, since it would create a continuity nightmare with repercussions for years to come, forcing it to be addressed in every present day story, by every present day character. Everyone would remember this huge occupation. Just look at how the Series 2 finale had to be mentioned in The Runaway Bride and Smith and Jones to preserve this continuity, along with every Davies era invasion addressed in Love and Monsters and The Sound of Drums. It's so important to retain this continuity, to keep the viewer on board, so I fully understand why this reversal needs to happen. Otherwise Donna and her family would have been survivors in a post-apocalyptic society. I think the reversal irks me less because I know that Davies was backed into a corner. I fully understand why it devalues the finale for a lot of people, making the events never happen in the first place, although Martha's student house getting blown up still happened, but I guess that comes with the job. I also think that the characters remembering the events of the finale is more important than the events themselves. All 3 episodes were very character heavy, so the true significance comes in the form of their character journeys and explorations, which the ending explores heavily, so I can overlook the physical time reversal, because the character growth remains, which is the more important stuff. The most important element of the 3-part finale is the exploration of the relationship between the Doctor and the Master. I think all 3 episodes do a fantastic job diving deep into their characters and their relationship with each other. The ending of The Last of the Time Lords does it really well in my opinion. When the Doctor is restored to his natural natural state, he flies towards the Master, who cowers in fear. I like to think that the Master isn't scared of the Doctor beating him, he's actually scared of losing yet again. This was one of his biggest schemes yet, with every single little detail planned out and Doctor-proofed. He had won and was seconds away from his ultimate victory, but he still fails, forced to retake his place as being inferior to the Doctor. He cowers because of that refusal to accept that he's lost. He just can't take it anymore. He has been beaten so many times and forced to live through the Time War, but he has still lost this impossible to lose situation because of his own obsession with the Doctor. I think that he's aware that he should have just killed Martha, so his refusal to accept he's been beaten comes from a place of realization and self-loathing, especially because the Doctor forgives him, revealing that's what he had to say earlier, the phrase that the Master was so scared of. I think it comes from that same self-loathing and obsession with the Doctor. Much like Martha earlier, the Doctor has proven he's been unfazed by everything, not taking the Master seriously, which is all he wants. One of the main driving forces of the Master is the desire to be almost justified and recognised by the Doctor, but the Doctor doesn't do that here, which is why the forgiveness is so powerful, driving this genius mastermind into the fetal position with 3 simple words. Because the Master has been beaten, the Toclafane tries to protect the Paradox Machine, giving the Master an escape. I like his desperate revitalization here, threatening to destroy the entire planet with him and the Doctor on it. He's desperately trying to regain control by bluffing and making empty threats. The Doctor is well aware that the Master wouldn't kill himself. Well, until Missy comes along. It shows their deep familiarity, that they know each other so well, also explaining how the Doctor knew about the countdown so far in advance, allowing him to use that for his and Martha's plan.
I never could resist a ticking clock.
The Master knew the Doctor well enough to Doctor-proof his plans, so I like that the Doctor is now in control and knows the Master is bluffing, switching these roles and the power really well. Another controversial aspect of the episode's climax is the Doctor deciding not to kill the Master, since the Master committed all of these horrible atrocities. Indeed, even though time was reversed, the Master still killed 1 billion people and tortured Martha's family. I've seen people point to the punishments of the Family of Blood as reasons why the Doctor letting the Master off is out of character, but I think it's actually very understandable from our protagonist's point of view, because he has such an established and long-lasting familiarity with the Master. This is someone he's known all his life, someone he grew up with on Gallifrey, someone who went through the same horrors during the Time War. They may not be actual brothers, but they're linked so strongly to one another. Even in Classic Who, the Doctor always showed a great reluctance to actually kill the Master, so his refusal to do so here makes a lot of sense. It's that classic enemy aspect like the Joker and Batman, where they almost don't want to kill each other because they define one another. The decision to spare him especially feels justified because they're the only 2 Time Lords left in reality. That's a lot of weight on the Doctor's shoulders if he chooses to execute not only the last member of his species, but one he spent his entire childhood with. He's already destroyed the Time Lords once, so you can understand why he wouldn't want to do it again. The Doctor has always seen the potential to redeem his frenemy, which is something Missy would later become the personification of, so I like this character aspect of him refusing to kill the Master. However, in order to solve the moral debate and keep the Doctor's hands clean, the Master suddenly gets shot by Lucy, mirroring his previous companion Chantho, who killed him at the end of Utopia. As a kid, I always thought that Lucy's betrayal came out of nowhere, but it seeded really well in my opinion. Even early on in The Sound of Drums, we're shown that she might have some lingering doubts beneath the surface, but she goes through an interesting character journey off screen during the finale. Right at the start of The Last of the Time Lords, when the Master comes in dancing, he kisses her and spins her away. Something I noticed when watching it for this video is that as soon as she turns away, she instantly stops smiling as the lyric "My heart feels dead inside" is heard. I think it's an incredibly subtle yet smart way to seed her betrayal, which is also shown later on, when the Master walks in cradling his hand and Lucy is sporting a sudden bruise underneath her eye, implying that he beat her off screen, making him even more of a monster and justifying her decision to kill him later on, because even though she was shown to be a monster in Sound of Drums, he's even worse than her, and his almost hypnotism of her has been wearing off over the year. The Master's death actually puts him back in control, which is an interesting wrinkle. He refuses to regenerate in a fantastic scene, with David Tennant putting in a great performance as the Doctor sobs and begs for the Master to regenerate, but he's too stubborn and allows himself to die, just to spite the Doctor. Even though the Doctor never does what they do to win, this scene here is the ultimate win for the Master, finally beating the Doctor for good, taking away all he had left. The Doctor and the Master could never bring themselves to kill each other, so this is the perfect ending for them, having the Master announce his victory by dying and refusing to give the Doctor the satisfaction of redeeming him. It's such a powerful moment, taking so much away from the Doctor, who has now lost his best friend and the last link back to his species. He had spent so long coming to terms with being the only survivor of the Time War, but the return and the sudden death of the Master throws him right back to that rawness of loss and loneliness, shown in the great scene of him burning the Master's body as This Is Gallifrey, Our Child at Our Home plays. I think this part of the ending manages to redeem all of the Space Jesus stuff from earlier, because it's so weighty and powerful, serving as a great way to explore the relationship of the Doctor and the Master. Again, like the 12th Doctor says in The Doctor Falls,
Stand with me. It's all I've ever wanted.
the post-action of The Last of the Time Lords is a good wrap-up of the character journeys we've experienced. There's a good, underrated scene of Martha giving Professor Doherty a bouquet of flowers and forgiving her for betraying Martha during the year that never was, since the Master held her son hostage and gave her no choice. It shows Martha's moral compass, because this version of Doherty never did anything wrong to her, but Martha forgives her anyway, showing that compassion and heart that drives Martha as a character. It's a great moment that nobody really talks about. Then the Doctor invites Jack on board the TARDIS, showing that he's grown since the beginning of Utopia, where he ran away from Jack. He's finally come to terms with Jack and no longer blames him for his immortality, because it wasn't his fault. I think it shows some real growth from the Doctor, essentially admitting he was wrong to run from Jack both of those times. I also like that Jack turns him down, showing how he's also come to terms with his place in the world. Utopia showed that he was basically only with Torchwood to pass the time as he waited for the Doctor to come back. But this ending shows that he's actually developed a real connection with the other members of Torchwood, convincing him to stay, since that's his home now. All of that time he was searching for a way out, but it turned out he found where he belonged right on Earth, carrying the Doctor's legacy himself. I just think it's quite poetic. I always liked the insinuation that he might possibly be the face of Bo, since it explains him knowing about the Master and Yana, but that's all it should have been. A fun little implication that makes you react like the Doctor and Martha. But then Stephen Moffat came along and said he wanted to lop Jack's head off in A Good Man Goes to War. And then Russell T Davies came back and said that Jack definitely is the face of Bo. And just no. I'll retreat into my own headcanon there. In fact, this is what Jack really said at that point.
The 21st century is when it all changes. You gotta be ready.
What does that mean?
Don't know, it just sounds good.
I both like and hate Martha's departure at the end of the episode. I like that she chooses to leave the Doctor, which makes her one of the only modern companions to actually leave in one piece. I also appreciate that he's able to understand her wanting to leave just by seeing her expression. He's had so many companions come and go, so it makes sense that he would immediately understand what this certain look entails. Personally, I think they should have stuck with her initial reasoning for leaving. She decides that her family has gone through so much that she has to look after them. This reason for her departure is perfectly in line with her character, since she was always shown to be family-centric and immensely caring for them. It can just be left at that. That's all the justification she needs. She's proven to herself that she is capable of all of these wonderful things, so she can leave the TARDIS with her head held high at her newfound independence and strength.
I spent a lot of time with you thinking I was second best, but you know what? I am good.
If it had been left here, her departure would have been perfect, but then she comes back and goes on about being in love with the Doctor, essentially making that the reason she leaves. And personally, that just leaves a bad taste in my mouth, since it devalues her entire character journey of self-worth, and makes it all about the Doctor, not her. It's probably the aspect I hate most about the episode, even more than Space Jesus or Goblin Doctor. It's disrespectful to Martha and hurts her character journey by making her lesser once again. As a huge fan of Martha, I just don't like it, but I've already spoken about that before. In my eyes, The Last of the Time Lords is actually a really good finale. It just needed some slight changes to make it as good as the other 2 episodes in the story. Some minor reworking could have made it one of the best finales. It's not an episode about the monsters, so the Toclafane are used fine as a minor presence, since it's all about the people in the episode. There's a real command of character throughout, building up the importance of Martha and her status as a companion, giving her a great journey of self-discovery and triumph. It explores the Doctor's relationship with the Master really well, giving it a new sheen of postmodernism by breaking down how they see the world and what they strive to achieve, showing how the Master does what he does expressly to make the Doctor respect and fear him. It's all about these 3 characters, and it knocks it out of the park with their character work. There's a brilliant atmosphere of pessimistic hopelessness that gets more oppressive as the story goes on, seeing how the Doctor is weakened and made into a pathetic, ineffectual creature. I honestly think the ending is the reason everyone has so many grievances with this episode. The first half of the episode barely puts a foot wrong, but it's when Martha steps foot on the Valiant that all of the criticisms come into play, with the perceived Deus Ex Machina, Space Jesus and time reversal. It shows how the climax of an episode can tarnish its reputation as a whole, since it leaves the viewers with a bad lasting impression. All of these criticisms are easily justifiable, and I can definitely understand how they ruin the episode for people. It's really important to hit the landing, and The Last of the Time Lords isn't able to do that in a satisfying way for most people, which is understandable. It shows how Russell T Davies had backed himself into a corner with the setup. He put himself in an impossible position. Personally, I think this episode shows how you can overlook flaws in an episode if it's written by a writer you trust and like. Davies is one of the best Doctor Who writers of all time, so I find it easier to overlook things like Space Jesus, but that's just my personal opinion. One thing I absolutely can't overlook, however, is the constant use of flashbacks. It was fine in Utopia and Sound of Drums, but it goes overboard here, giving us flashbacks to things we already know, flashbacks to episodes from earlier in the series, and even flashbacks to things within this very episode. It's frustrating, hand-holding the audience too much and undervaluing their intelligence. Stephen Moffat would later handle these things a bit better, albeit far too much in the opposite way and expecting the audience to be smarter than they were. Even though I've not really got the answers for most of the main criticisms, The Last of the Time Lords isn't as bad as most people say. It's just the ending that causes this dissatisfaction, but most of it was out of Davies' control and could have easily been fixed with some ever so slight rewriting, so I don't think it deserves the level of hate it gets, compared to more obviously flawed episodes like Fear Her. So much of the episode is good that I don't think the ending ruins that build up, and the ending is even redeemed by the actual ending. But what do you think? Is The Last of the Time Lords undeserving of its reputation, or should it be burned on a funeral pyre in a Welsh quarry? Let me know in the comments, and I'm going for a very long rest. See you next time. And I'd like to give a special thank you to my gold level patrons, Steph McNever Miller and Mark Hippold Guy Taylor. Thank you a lot for your support.